If you're a fan of The Office, you might be familiar with a shrewd custom of getting married in your own grave. Dwight, the character, remarks that it makes for weddings a pretty bleak affair, but funerals are a pretty happy occasion. The story of Ruth really begins with a funeral, and it ends with a wedding. It begins in a pretty bleak place, but it ends in this grand celebration. It begins with death, and it ends with life. It makes it in many ways a grand metaphor in 4 short chapters of the redemptive work of God amongst humanity. Indeed, the story of Ruth parallels and provides witness to the way God works miraculously and redemptively to sow life from death, joy from pain. The story of Ruth begins with Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons leaving Bethlehem and moving to Moab to escape a terrible famine that is in their land. Elimelech dies shortly after they get to Moab, but his sons marry Moabite women, and they live their life for about 10 years until, tragically, both his sons die as well. And now we're left with just Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. Naomi decides to move back to her own homeland, and one of her daughters-in-law decides to stay in Moab. But Ruth, the other, famously says, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." They arrive there in Bethlehem, and they are now 2 desperate, desolate women buried in the poverty that was unique to women in their situation, without father, without husband, without son. Therefore, with no ability to own property, no ability to produce an income, no ability to have a future. All is lost. In the midst of their poverty, Ruth goes out and gleans in the field, which means she picks up, after the harvesters have already passed through, just the tiniest remnants of what's left behind. In the course of her hard work and labor on behalf of her mother-in-law, because of her faithfulness and the quality of her character, she comes to the attention of the landowner, a man named Boaz, who we discover is a man that's faithful to God, knows his word, and does his best to follow it. He not only honors God, but he works to bless those around him, even those who are lower in society than him, his harvesters, their wives and servants, and even the widows and orphans who are gleaning in his fields. Turns out that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer, which means he has a responsibility under Israelite law to provide for Ruth and Naomi. Of course, there are others that also have the similar responsibility, but who refuse to do it because it might cost them too much. But Boaz is a godly, honorable man, and so we discover that he's willing to put his own fortune, his own land, his own name on the line to do what is right by the word and will of his God. And so, Ruth's story that begins in death and tragedy, poverty, comes to conclusion here and now in the 4th chapter of the book of Ruth found in the Bible with a wedding to Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth, and in so doing gives her a home and property, purpose, status in society as his wife. But then, through the work of God, they conceive a child, a son. The son that is born to them is considered the child of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband, or at least he's the inheritor of all that Elimelech possessed. It gives life and meaning. It gives hope and opportunity. It gives a firstborn son to which the property, the inheritance, can pass, which means now that Naomi and Ruth have recovered from their poverty. They've recovered from their loss, their grief, their bitterness, and their despair. Though they still carry around with them the grief of their loss, their life has changed forever for the better. The story of Ruth is one of God's intercession, interceding in a particular way through the faithful choices of those included in the narrative. They're juxtaposed over and against some who don't choose faithfulness. But through the faithfulness of those in this testimony, this witness, this story, we discover how great our God really is, and the depth to which he will go to ransom us, and the heights to which he can take us. After the birth of their child, Boaz and Ruth put him into Naomi's arms. And the women there around Naomi in chapter 4 of Ruth say, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. From your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." This is a powerful testimony from a group of people whose voice is not often heard in a patriarchal society. This group of women who say Ruth has done more and better by Naomi than 7 sons could have done for her. They're saying, in other words, no one could have done more or better or loved her more fiercely than Ruth. It's quite a testimony, especially about a foreign-born woman, a Moabite woman nonetheless, whose fidelity to Naomi was born of her fidelity and her trust in God. Her willingness to cast her lot with the God of Elimelech's household, that is, the God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim El Shaddai, the one true and only God of all. Because of her faithfulness, Ruth was able to bring immeasurable blessing, joy to Naomi. You know, when they first arrived in Bethlehem, Naomi wouldn't let people call her by her name, which Naomi means pleasant. She said, "Call me Mara." She changed her name from Naomi to Mara, from pleasant to bitter. She told everybody, "Look, I'm just a bitter old woman and I'll never have anything ever again, and so you might as well just call me as such." And now suddenly she is once again Naomi, through the direct intervention of our great and glorious God. And in her arms, she holds the tangible physical evidence of that redemption, a newborn son who is named Obed. Obed would become the father of David, the great king of Israel. In dramatic fashion, God gives birth to his son. Boaz, who has Obed, who has Jesse, who has David, and in so doing, Boaz, his name, his legacy is sealed in the annals of human history forever and ever, even up to this day, but even more so. The inheritance of his great-grandson David that is imparted to Jesus the Christ becomes an eternal inheritance, an eternal kingdom that has dominion over all that is and all that will ever be. This is the ultimate rags to riches story in Scripture. It is the ultimate example of how a family can be put upon, hard-pressed, who can experience the worst devastation that this world can have, that can sink into the lowest poverty imaginable, but whose faithfulness through it all can bring them to a place of healing, of recovery, and of hope. Who can experience a blessing that carries on beyond their lifetime, that can give them a grace that they never could realize even in their own lifetime. So great is our God's ability to redeem that he can reach into the deepest, darkest, most broken places of our lives. And he can restore us to wholeness, to life, and to life everlasting. That child that Naomi held in her arms, the one that was recognized as a physical, living expression of God's ability to be a kinsman redeemer, a patriarch of a family who gives everything he has to bring a lost family member back into the fold of the family, is a foreshadowing, a precursor of the child that is to come, the child who is from the exact same line and lineage. Of course, I mean the other child born in Bethlehem. That is Jesus. Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He is the tangible expression of God's deep, everlasting desire to ransom you and I, his wayward family members, who through choices of our own and the brokenness of the world have found ourselves estranged from him. Jesus comes as a tangible expression of God's desire to wrap his arms around you and to bring you into the everlasting fold of his eternal family. The story, the witness of Ruth, though lived out 3,500 so years ago, has as much relevance for your life and mine today as it ever has. I know that you have experienced brokenness in this world, loss. Perhaps you have found yourself estranged from God, estranged from family, estranged from hope. Reach out to the Lord. He's here. He's there with you. He knows your circumstance. He knows the poverty of your soul and the brokenness of your heart. And he has sent a kinsman redeemer to ransom you back to the fold of his family. The witness of Ruth is a witness of what even the smallest acts of faithfulness can do to change the course of an entire family's trajectory in life. And the same is true for you. Listen to the Lord as he speaks words of grace and hope, of calling over you. Say yes to all that he invites you to engage in, and look for the blessing that comes so certainly from his hand upon those who remain faithful to him through all seasons, good and bad. God bless you, and God bless your household.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. Be gracious to you. Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May His favor